Are you ready for what you're about to see? What if I told you that the familiar rules of engagement could be rewritten in an instant when something completely unexpected enters the field? What's it like to face an enemy who prepared for everything but one single element that would change the course of history? How is it possible that even the most impregnable fortress becomes vulnerable? And what happens when an adversary, confident in their invincibility, encounters a weapon they never even suspected existed? Today, we'll delve into a story where brilliant defense met an unconventional solution and show how sometimes just one detail is enough to turn the entire world upside down. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. On February 19th, 1945, 8 miles southeast of Japan, on the island of Iwo Jima, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was in his command bunker, shielded by 3-foot-thick, reinforced concrete walls. Above him rose 500 more such fortifications, carved into the volcanic rock, each designed to withstand even the most powerful American bombardment. For months, Allied shells had rained down on these shelters, direct hits capable of leveling entire buildings barely left a scratch on their surface. Japanese soldiers proudly called them invincible. American Marines, however, called them death traps. Every frontal assault ended the same way. Waves of Marines were mowed down by intense fire before they could even approach the bunker entrances. The calculation was brutal and simple. 20,000 Japanese defenders, an unlimited supply of ammunition, and perfect fields of fire. Yet, on the black sand beaches that morning, something landed that was not mentioned in any Japanese intelligence report. 8 M4A3 Sherman tanks. They looked ordinary, except for one detail the defenders couldn't discern from their concrete strongholds. These tanks didn't carry conventional shells. They were equipped with compressed napalm fuel tanks, capable of spewing liquid fire 100 yards on command. The Japanese had created an ideal defense against everything they knew about American war tactics. They had no idea the Marines were about to completely change the rules of the game. The pre-dawn darkness of February 19, 1945, enveloped Iwo Jima in a deceptive calm. Captain David Shoup, hunched in a cramped landing craft, studied the reconnaissance photos one last time. The images revealed what Allied command had dubbed the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific. A volcanic island transformed into an impenetrable concrete fortress. 500 pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements were carved into the rock and reinforced with steel. Each position was interconnected with others, creating overlapping fields of fire, capable of cutting down attacking forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Shoup carefully folded the photos and tucked them into his field jacket. Around him, Marines from K Company checked their weapons with the mechanical precision of men who understood their odds. The preliminary bombardment had been the most intense in the history of the Pacific theater. 74 days of continuous shelling that had turned the island's surface into a cratered lunar landscape. Nevertheless, aerial reconnaissance revealed a disturbing truth. The bunkers remained intact. 3 feet of reinforced concrete had withstood an assault that would have leveled entire city blocks. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. 800 yards offshore, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi emerged from his command bunker to survey the American fleet gathering in the pre-dawn twilight. 900 vessels stretched across the horizon, their silhouettes black against the starry sky. Kuribayashi had dedicated 8 months to preparing for this moment, transforming Iwo Jima into what he believed was an impregnable fortress. His engineers had dug 11 miles of tunnels, connecting defensive positions, allowing troops to move stealthily between bunkers. Artillery pieces were housed in caves, carved deep into the volcanic rock, protected from counter-battery fire by tons of stone overhead. The Japanese general had meticulously studied American tactics during his previous assignment in the United States. He thoroughly understood their preference for overwhelming firepower, followed by a direct infantry assault. His defensive system was designed to neutralize both advantages. The bunkers were meant to withstand bombardment and then decimate infantry attacks with concentrated machine gun and artillery fire. Simple, proven, mathematically sound. At 09 hours, the engines of the landing craft roared to life. Shoop felt the deck vibrate under his boots as the Higgins boat sped towards the black sand beaches. The preliminary bombardment had ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the sound of diesel engines and churning water. Intelligence suggested that the Marines were facing the bloodiest assault in the Corps' history. Standard tactics called for an artillery barrage, followed by an infantry advance supported by conventional tank fire. Every Marine in the landing craft understood the brutal arithmetic of bunker warfare. Attackers required overwhelming numerical superiority to overcome fortified positions. The first wave reached the beach at 09:30. Machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions, mowing down Marines before they could advance beyond the waterline. Mortar rounds flew with deadly accuracy over the landing zone. Each explosion sent geysers of black sand and shrapnel through the ranks. Shoop watched as his men dove for cover behind scattered debris. Pinned down 50 yards from the surf, the bunkers had withstood the bombardment exactly as Kuribayashi had predicted. From his command post, the Japanese general tracked radio communications with grim satisfaction. His defensive plan was working perfectly. American casualties mounted, while his own forces remained protected in their concrete shelters. Overlapping fields of fire prevented any significant advance, forcing the Marines to bunch up in kill zones where artillery could decimate entire units. This was the battle Kuribayashi had prepared for, a grueling war of attrition that would bleed the Americans dry. But something was different about this assault, and that Tsar Quotak 12 was already preparing to enter the stage and completely turn the tide of events. Behind the initial waves of infantry, 8 unusual Sherman tanks rolled off specialized landing craft onto the volcanic sand. These M4A3s looked identical to standard armor from a distance, but closer inspection revealed critical modifications. Where conventional tanks mounted 75mm guns, these machines carried flamethrower equipment connected to massive fuel tanks. The flamethrower mechanism could project burning liquid up to 100 yards, far enough to reach bunker entrances from positions outside effective small arms range. And it was this seemingly insignificant element that was about to become a true nightmare for the impregnable Japanese positions. Silence. It's a word that shouldn't be associated with war. But that's exactly how it was on Iwo Jima. the deafening calm before the storm that was about to break over the Japanese defenders. They didn't know they were about to face something that would forever change the face of bunker warfare. What would it be like to spend years building the perfect fortress, only to discover it was useless against a weapon you never even suspected existed? How would you feel if your meticulously crafted strategy crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds? And finally, what would you do if you realized that your preparation, your experience, everything you believed in, had suddenly become inadequate? Today, we will tell the story of the day hell came to Iwo Jima, the day American Marines introduced a weapon that made even the most resolute Japanese soldiers flinch. A weapon that turned impregnable bunkers into fiery furnaces and confidence in victory into the cold touch of doubt. If you've ever felt helpless in the face of an overwhelming force, know that you are not alone. But like the Marines, we'll show you how to overcome it. In this video, we'll delve into the history of the Zippo flamethrower tanks and their devastating impact on Iwo Jima. We'll uncover 3 key moments that forever changed the tactics of war. And here's the first. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sergeant Walter Lutz, commanding the lead flamethrower tank, sat in his steel machine, surrounded by 400 gallons of napalm under an immense pressure of 800 pounds per square inch. These machines, nicknamed Asaitokotwi by the Marines, sarcastic nod to the famous lighter, were the embodiment of destructive power. Lutz, having undergone intensive training, masterfully coordinated fuel delivery and ignition timing to ensure maximum effect. Flamethrowers were incredibly effective against fortified positions, but also carried enormous risks. The fuel tanks turned each vehicle into a potential bomb, and their limited range forced crews to advance into the thick of enemy fire. Japanese defenders, with no intelligence about flamethrower tanks, were completely unprepared for this turn of events. Their reconnaissance had been silent about armored vehicles capable of spewing fire, and their defensive structures were designed to repel conventional artillery and small arms. As Lutz's tank advanced towards the first bunker complex, Japanese machine gunners inside the concrete fortress prepared to engage what appeared to be a standard Sherman. They had repelled dozens of similar attacks using a proven tactic, waiting for the tank to approach, then concentrating fire on its vision slits and tracks. But at 75 yards from the target, Lutz gave the order to fire, and the world of the Japanese defenders changed forever. A stream of burning fuel erupted from the flamethrower's nozzle, arcing through the morning air like liquid lightning. The napalm slammed into the bunker's embrasure and surged inside, instantly transforming the concrete chamber into an infernal furnace exceeding 2,000 degree. The Japanese soldiers inside had no chance of escape, nor even the opportunity to comprehend what was happening. The reinforced concrete that had protected them from artillery shells just moments before now became a trap, containing superheated air and poisonous smoke. In a matter of seconds, the supposedly impregnable position was neutralized. Marines previously pinned down by machine gun fire from that bunker suddenly found they could advance. However, the psychological impact of this spectacle far surpassed the tactical advantage. Across the battlefield, Japanese defenders watched in horror as their most powerful positions erupted in flames. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives proved utterly useless against this new weapon. General Kuribayashi received the first reports with disbelief. Bunkers that had withstood months of bombardment were being destroyed in seconds by single tanks. His meticulously constructed defensive system, based on proven principles of fortification warfare, was collapsing under the assault of a weapon he had never seen nor even imagined. The Americans had changed the fundamental nature of bunker warfare, and his preparation suddenly seemed inadequate. For the first time since arriving on Iwo Jima, the Japanese general felt the cold touch of doubt. "Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from." The concept of mounting flamethrowers on tanks was born more out of desperate necessity than strategic planning. 6 months earlier, Marine Corps engineers at Quantico anxiously observed mounting infantry casualties during Pacific Island assaults. It became clear that conventional weapons were incapable of effectively neutralizing Japanese bunker systems. Colonel Robert Blake, head of the Marine Corps Equipment Board, after reviewing casualty reports from Saipan and Guam, authorized experiments with flamethrower systems. A standard infantry flamethrower had a range of only 40 yards, forcing soldiers to approach within grenade-throwing distance of enemy positions. This was tactically impossible against well-protected bunkers. The solution involved scaling up existing technology. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had already developed flamethrower equipment for clearing beach obstacles, utilizing pressurized fuel delivery systems capable of projecting burning liquid significantly further. Blake's engineers adapted this naval equipment for installation on M4A3 Sherman tanks, creating hybrid machines that combined armored protection with devastating incendiary power. The modification process required removing the tank's 75mm main gun and replacing it with a flamethrower nozzle connected to fuel tanks installed inside the vehicle. Captain Robert McVeigh oversaw the conversion of the first 8 prototypes at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in December 1944. Each tank carried 400 gallons of napalm fuel, a mixture of gasoline thickened with polystyrene to create a substance that burned longer and adhered to surfaces more effectively than pure gasoline. The fuel delivery system operated under pressure generated by compressed nitrogen cylinders, allowing crews to project flames up to 100 yards, with enough accuracy to hit bunker embrasures from relatively safe positions. The flamethrower itself was a marvel of engineering. The nozzle assembly featured adjustable flow controls that allowed crews to vary flame intensity from narrow streams for precise targeting to wide patterns for area denial. Ignition was achieved by pilot burners fed by a separate fuel system, ensuring reliable flame generation, even in the harshest combat conditions. The entire system could provide continuous fire for 90 seconds or approximately 30 individual bursts, depending on duration and intensity settings. McVeigh insisted on extensive crew training before deploying the machines in combat. Tank crews had to master fuel system operations, flame-throwing techniques, and tactical application procedures that differed fundamentally from conventional armor tactics. Unlike standard tanks engaging targets at maximum range, Flamethrower tanks required close coordination with infantry and careful positioning to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. These machines were particularly vulnerable to artillery and anti-tank weapons due to their fuel load and the necessity of operating at relatively short distances, making each deployment incredibly risky, but often the only viable solution in bunker warfare. Scenario: have you ever wondered what happens when irreconcilable wills clash and machines designed not just to shoot, but to burn everything to the ground enter the battlefield? How does the course of history change when flamethrower tanks emerge, and at what cost are victories achieved under such conditions? Today, we will delve into the history of these unique machines, their tactics, and their impact on the outcome of battles. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tanks evolved through trial and error, forged in the crucible of training exercises. Crews, under McVeigh's guidance, meticulously learned to coordinate their attacks with advancing infantry. Conventional tanks provided long-range fire support, while flamethrower vehicles were designated for neutralizing specific targets obstructing the infantry's path. The most effective tactic involves stealthily approaching bunkers from an angle that masked their movement until the final stage of the assault. At this point, speed and surprise became crucial factors, capable of breaking through even the densest defensive fire. Sergeant Lutz distinguished himself as the most proficient flamethrower tank commander during training, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of flamethrower tactics that deeply impressed his instructors. His team, Driver Private Johnson, Gunner Corporal Martinez, and Loader Private Davis, honed their bunker assault procedures to such a degree that they could execute complex maneuvers without a single word. The coordination required among crew members surpassed that needed for conventional tank operations, as flamethrowing demanded meticulous timing and positioning, leaving no room for error. The psychological impact of flamethrower tanks was impossible to predict during training exercises. No preparation could replicate the terror that flamethrower weapons instilled in enemy soldiers, or the morale boost experienced by friendly troops when previously impregnable positions suddenly became vulnerable. Intelligence reports from the European Theatre of Operations indicated that German forces often abandoned their positions rather than face incendiary attacks. However, the conditions of the Pacific Theater presented entirely different challenges due to Japanese defensive tactics and cultural factors that made surrender an extremely rare occurrence. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations demanded extensive support infrastructure. Each such vehicle consumed fuel at an incredible rate, many times exceeding the expenditure of conventional ammunition. Just one day of combat could completely deplete a tank's fuel supply, requiring frequent resupply missions, often under enemy fire. The napalm mixture required specialized handling procedures and specific storage facilities, significantly complicating field logistics. Furthermore, the compressed nitrogen system needed regular maintenance and pressure checks to ensure reliable operation in combat. The Marine Corps doctrine traditionally emphasized firepower and mobility, but flamethrower tanks represented a significant departure from established tactical principles. These machines sacrificed long-range combat capability and substantial ammunition loads for one specialized function: bunker destruction. Such compromises forced commanders to re-evaluate fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle employment, particularly the relationship between tanks and infantry in assault operations. The conventional wisdom was that tanks should provide fire support from positions that maximized their armor protection and gun range. Flamethrower tanks, however, required aggressive positioning that exposed them to concentrated enemy fire. The decision to deploy only 8 flamethrower tanks to Iwo Jima reflected both resource limitations and uncertainty regarding their effectiveness in actual combat. Marine Corps planners allocated extremely limited space on transport ships for experimental weapons, prioritizing proven systems over unverified innovations. These 8 tanks constituted the entire inventory of combat-ready flamethrower vehicles available to Pacific Fleet naval forces, making their performance crucial for future flamethrower weapon development programs. The technical specifications of the M4A3 flamethrower tank variant included armor thickness ranging from 25 to 76 millimeters depending on the location, providing protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, while remaining vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and direct artillery hits. The vehicle's weight increased from 33 to 37 tons due to fuel system modifications, which reduced mobility and increased ground pressure on soft surfaces like sand. Engine performance remained adequate for tactical movement, but fuel consumption significantly increased due to the added weight and power requirements of the flamethrower system. The flamethrower nozzle could traverse 30 degrees left or right from the tank's center line, with an elevation adjustment range from -10 degrees to +120 degrees. This limited horizontal aiming required careful positioning to engage targets, as the tank's hull needed to be oriented toward the target area before effective flamethrowing was possible. Crew visibility was restricted compared to conventional tanks due to modifications required for the fuel system installation, making coordination with supporting infantry essential for situational awareness and target identification. Private First Class Hiroshi Shigeta crouched in Bunker Complex 7, fort watching. As American tanks advanced across the killing field his unit had prepared for months. The concrete walls around him were 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel bars and designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns. His Type 96 machine gun was positioned to cover the main route of advance, with overlapping fields of fire from adjacent positions, ensuring that no enemy could cross the open ground without suffering casualties. Everything proceeded as planned until the lead American tank stopped 75 yards away and aimed something that was not a gun barrel in his direction. The jet of liquid fire that erupted from Lutz's tank transformed the battlefield in a way no tactical manual had anticipated. Shigeta watched as the burning fuel arced through the air like molten lightning, striking his bunker's embrasure with the force of dragon's breath. Napalm splashed onto the concrete and steel, then surged through the opening like burning water, instantly filling the chamber with flames reaching temperatures over 2000 degrees. Imagine a fortress capable of withstanding months of the most brutal artillery bombardments, yet instantly transformed into a deadly trap. Inside, temperatures soared above 1000 degrees Celsius, as the once reliable concrete walls became a crucible for an inferno, trapping superheated air and lethal smoke. Shigetta's screams from this hellish scene ceased in less than 3 seconds as the raging flames mercilessly consumed the last gasp of oxygen in the confined space. How was this possible? What weapon could inflict such devastation? And could these events forever alter the face of warfare? Captain Shoup, observing this unimaginable scene from 50 yards behind the tank advance, witnessed how the seemingly impregnable bunker, which had pinned down 2 platoons of Marines for 3 hours, suddenly erupted in a blinding flash, then fell into absolute silence. The machine gun bursts vanished, and the whistling mortar rounds over the beach ceased. A main defensive strong point, which intelligence had warned was an unassailable bastion, had been neutralized by a single incendiary strike lasting only 8 seconds. This was not merely a story of battle. It was an account of how one moment, one tactical decision, overturned all preconceived notions of resilience and vulnerability. Realizing the incredible effectiveness of what he had witnessed, Captain Shoup immediately radioed headquarters, ordering immediate coordination between the surviving flamethrower tanks and his infantry units. If this unprecedented weapon could obliterate enemy fortifications with such astonishing ease, then the entire tactical situation on Iwo Jima was destined for radical change. A new era of combat was unfolding before him on this island, where seemingly invulnerable positions suddenly proved fatally vulnerable. Simultaneously, on another sector of the front, Tank Commander Lutz, having traversed his turret 10 degrees to the left, targeted the next objective. This was a reinforced pillbox, or Yatsquote 46 Usarim, Dae, housing a 75mm anti-tank gun that completely controlled a key route inland. The Japanese had constructed this position using 5-foot reinforced concrete walls on all sides, with the gun's embrasure protected by heavy steel plates. Until this moment, conventional tank shells had merely ricocheted off the stronghold without causing any damage, and any attempt at an infantry assault would have been suicidal due to dense crossfire from flanking positions. But now, something had arrived that could change this equation. Lutz ordered the driver to close the distance by another 20 yards to ensure maximum flame penetration at an effective range of 60 yards. The anti-tank gun crew, entrenched inside the pillbox, could not have imagined the type of weapon they were about to face. Their training focused entirely on recognizing armored vehicles and practicing procedures for engaging conventional tanks with tactics based on precise aiming and shell selection for various targets. As Lutz's tank relentlessly approached, the gunner, Corporal Yamamoto, prepared to open fire on what he believed was a standard Sherman, now at an ideal range for engagement. The flamethrower nozzle was not immediately recognized as part of a weapon system, and Japanese intelligence, unfortunately, had no information about American flamethrower tanks. Yamamoto was just adjusting his gun's elevation when his world suddenly erupted and transformed into a raging torrent of liquid fire. The napalm stream struck the gun's embrasure with terrifying accuracy, surging through the opening and instantly coating every surface inside the pillbox with burning fuel that clung mercilessly to concrete, steel, and most terrifyingly, human flesh. The entire gun crew perished instantly, overcome by superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could even take a single breath. This was not just fire. It was absolute annihilation. Thus, the 75mm gun, once capable of disabling any tank on the battlefield, was instantly reduced to a pile of useless metal within a chamber engulfed in flames that continued to rage for 6 hours. The position that had controlled the central path to Mount Suribachi was completely neutralized in less than 10 seconds. These events did not merely alter tactics. They sowed the seeds of a new, profound fear. Meanwhile, Commander McVeigh meticulously coordinated the advance of his remaining 7 flamethrower tanks across the rugged volcanic beach, directing each combat vehicle toward precisely identified targets in close cooperation with infantry unit commanders. The tactical deployment of flamethrower tanks demanded incredibly close integration with supporting forces, as just quote 50 type vehicles remained vulnerable to enemy fire during their approach. They critically needed infantry protection to prevent daring attempts by Japanese soldiers to launch close-quarters assaults using satchel charges or magnetic mines. However, as often happens in war, coordination proved far more challenging than in training exercises. Radio communications constantly degraded in the heat of battle, and thick smoke from burning enemy positions made visual signals virtually indistinguishable. Under these conditions, it required not just adherence to a plan, but instantaneous adaptability. The psychological impact of these flamethrower attacks spread like wildfire throughout the Japanese defensive positions on the island. Soldiers who had spent months constructing what they genuinely believed were impregnable fortifications watched in horror as their most formidable bunkers erupted in flames and fell into an ominous silence within seconds. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives now offered no protection against a weapon capable of penetrating through the smallest embrasures like a stream of boiling water. Radio messages from the front lines described American tanks spewing fire like mythical dragons, inevitably triggering a wave of panic among the defenders. They had prepared for conventional warfare, but encountered something entirely different, far beyond their experience and training, which eroded their morale and faith in victory. General Kuribayashi, in his deeply entrenched command bunker beneath Mount Suribachi, tracked the evolving tactical situation with growing apprehension. Radio communications brought increasingly desperate reports from his forward commanders. The American advance was unfolding with a stunning speed that none of his staff's rehearsed scenarios had predicted. Defensive positions, calculated to hold for days, were falling within hours. Flamethrower tanks were destroying bunkers faster than his reserves could arrive to reinforce threatened sectors. His meticulously constructed defensive system, designed to channel American attacks into predefined killing zones, was now rapidly crumbling as these fiery machines breached the positions that formed the very foundation of his carefully devised strategy. It became clear that the war had changed. However, such overwhelming tactical success of the flamethrower tanks also generated new, unforeseen problems for Marine commanders. Infantry companies, previously pinned down for hours, suddenly found they could advance rapidly through terrain once considered impassable under heavy machine gun fire. But the speed of breakthrough threatened to outpace both artillery support and logistical resupply, creating a potential risk of isolated pockets of Marines deep within enemy territory. Captain Shoup, understanding this, initiated active coordination with battalion headquarters, aiming to ensure that conventional tanks and artillery could maintain the flamethrower tank's pace, providing crucial mutual support among all weapon systems. The balance between speed and safety became critically important. Inside one of the flamethrower tanks, Private Davis, loader and crew member of Lutz's tank, tirelessly fed compressed nitrogen into the fuel system while closely monitoring gauges that indicated the remaining flamethrowing range. Each deadly burst of napalm consumed approximately 12 gallons of fuel, and the total tank capacity of 400 gallons allowed for about 30 such attacks before resupply was required. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations differed fundamentally from servicing conventional armored vehicles, as fuel consumption significantly exceeded ammunition expenditure. Davis calculated that his tank had enough fuel for 6 more bunker attacks before needing to return to the beach for refueling. The next target for Lutz's tank was the third bunker complex, which housed a critically important communications center. This center coordinated defensive fire for the entire southeastern sector of the island. Japanese radio operators, sheltered within this fortified structure, maintained constant communication with artillery batteries located in caves throughout the volcanic terrain, directing counter-battery fire against American positions and coordinating defensive movements among isolated strongpoints. Destroying this facility would effectively blind Kuribayashi's forces in one of the most critical sectors of the battlefield, completely disrupting the command and control system that sustained his entire defensive network. This was the key to victory. Imagine a hell on earth where steel melts and men vanish in flames. What if a weapon, once deemed invincible, suddenly became a deadly trap for its users? And what if even the strongest fortifications could be erased in minutes, but at an unimaginable cost? In battles as desperate as this one, solutions are found, though sometimes they bring new, terrifying challenges. This account delves into the story of flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima, exploring how they changed the course of the battle, their unexpected vulnerabilities, and the immense psychological burden they placed on their crews. Prepare to learn about the price paid for deadly effectiveness. At the outset of the assault, Corporal Martinez, operating the tank's flamethrower system, meticulously adjusted the projector nozzle for maximum target penetration. He initiated the ignition sequence, and the pilot lights, fed by an autonomous propane system, flickered to life, ensuring reliable ignition even in the harshest combat conditions. The fuel gauge indicated ideal operating parameters, and the traverse mechanism precisely aligned the projector with the enemy bunker's main communication antenna. Martinez pulled the trigger. A high-pressure stream of napalm traveled 60 yards across the volcanic sand before slamming into the bunker entrance with the force of concentrated hellfire. The communications center instantly erupted, flames engulfing every corner of the underground facility, destroying expensive radio equipment and eliminating the technicians who maintained contact with Japanese artillery positions across the island. The loss of this critical communication hub disorganized the entire defensive strategy for many square miles, consigning isolated bunkers to independent fighting without mutual support or coordinated fire missions. The tactical significance of this strike far surpassed the physical destruction. General Kuribayashi's ability to react to the American advance steadily deteriorated with each communication node destroyed by a flamethrower attack. By 2 p.m. on the first day of the assault, the 8 flamethrower tanks had already neutralized 27 bunkers, pillboxes, and defensive positions that had initially been designated as primary targets for the entire first week of operations. This breakthrough exceeded all planned estimates, creating opportunities for a rapid development of the offensive that threatened the complete collapse of Japanese resistance in the southern part of the island. A weapon that had recently been considered an experimental system proved its devastating effectiveness against fortifications that just hours earlier had seemed utterly impregnable. Yet they were unaware that each victory brought them closer to a new, more terrible threat. The Japanese counterattack began on February 21st at 1730, when Kuribayashi's artillery batteries emerged from their cave shelters to shell the advancing flamethrower tanks with concentrated fire. The general had spent 48 hours meticulously analyzing the new American weapon. Realizing that their fuel systems represented critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited with precise artillery fire, his artillery commanders received orders to prioritize flamethrower tanks over conventional armored vehicles, using high-explosive shells designed to rupture fuel tanks and create catastrophic secondary explosions, a tactic that would soon spell disaster for one of them. The first salvo struck near Lutz's tank as it approached a fortified ridge line, sending geysers of volcanic sand and steel fragments across the battlefield. Lutz felt his tank shudder from the near misses as Japanese gunners adjusted their fire on his position. The M4A3's armor could deflect small arms fire and shell fragments, but direct hits from 75mm artillery would penetrate the hull and ignite the 400 gallons of napalm fuel stored within. His driver, Private Johnson, performed evasive maneuvers while Lutz scanned through his periscope for the source of the incoming fire. The Japanese had learned to camouflage their gun positions with volcanic ash and debris, making counter-battery fire difficult, even when the artillery pieces revealed their locations with muzzle flashes. The vulnerability of flamethrower tanks to artillery fire had been identified during training exercises, but real combat conditions proved significantly more complex than any simulations could have predicted. Tank crews operating under fire faced the constant threat of a catastrophic fuel explosion, creating psychological stress far exceeding typical combat conditions. The knowledge that a single penetrating hit would transform their vehicle into a fireball impacted crew effectiveness and tactical decision-making in ways not adequately accounted for during preparation. Lutz's crew maintained discipline, but the strain of operating a Busus 63 manifested in their tense radio communications and sometimes hesitant movements. Captain McVeigh coordinated defensive measures from his command tank, directing conventional armored vehicles to provide counter-battery fire while the flamethrower tanks withdrew to covered positions. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tank deployment had not adequately accounted for prolonged artillery engagements, focusing instead on rapid bunker assaults, followed by immediate withdrawal. The Japanese counterattack forced Marine commanders to adapt their tactics in real time, balancing the need to protect vulnerable flamethrower tanks with the imperative to maintain offensive momentum. McVeigh ordered his remaining 7 flamethrower tanks to operate in pairs, one vehicle providing covering fire, while the other maneuvered to safety, forcing commanders to make decisions that would determine who survived and who would burn alive. The first catastrophic loss occurred at 6:45 p.m. when a Japanese 105mm howitzer scored a direct hit on a flamethrower tank commanded by Sergeant Peters. The high explosive shell penetrated the vehicle's side armor and detonated inside the fuel compartment, igniting 400 gallons of napalm in a fireball that rose 300 feet above the volcanic landscape. The explosion was visible even from ships at sea and created a mushroom cloud that marked the destruction of 1/8 of the Marine Corps' entire flamethrower tank inventory. The crew perished instantly, vaporized by temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. The psychological impact of Peter's death spread among the remaining tank crews, who understood that their vehicles could be turned into crematories by a single well-aimed artillery round. The loss also represented a significant tactical setback, as each destroyed flamethrower tank reduced the Marines' bunker clearing capability by 12%. With only 7 vehicles remaining, commanders faced difficult decisions regarding risk-benefit ratios in subsequent operations. The weapon that had seemed invincible during their initial success now appeared fragile and vulnerable to enemy countermeasures. Imagine yourself on a battlefield where every step is paid for in blood, and suddenly, a weapon appears that can literally burn the enemy out of their impregnable strongholds. Victory seems close, doesn't it? What if I told you that this perfect solution almost turned into a disaster for those who wielded it? How is that possible? Why did what should have been a decisive advantage instantly become a target? And what unimaginable ways did both sides learn to survive and adapt when the price of error was life itself? Today, we will delve into a story where the deadliest machines were pushed to their limits, and people, at the brink of their strength, searched for a way out of seemingly hopeless situations. Have you ever faced a situation where your most powerful tool turned out to be your most vulnerable? The history of these tanks is a vivid testament to that. They were supposed to crush the enemy, but instead, they found themselves under fire, forcing commanders to seek entirely new approaches. Stay with us and watch until the end, because it only gets more interesting. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Marines believed they had found the key to breaking through the Japanese defenses on Iwo Jima, but harsh reality quickly shattered those illusions. We will discuss 3 critical issues that jeopardized the entire plan and how they were overcome. The first was an unexpected vulnerability to enemy artillery, which forced American soldiers to rethink the very concept of using these machines. This is a story of how even the most powerful weapon can become a liability if its application is not meticulously planned. Stay with us and watch until the end, because it only gets more interesting. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Japanese artillery observers, quickly learning from the first successful engagement, promptly adjusted their tactics. They focused on 2 key vulnerabilities: the flamethrower tank's limited mobility and their inevitably predictable routes to bunkers. Battery commanders received comprehensive intelligence on American equipment's combat characteristics, from fuel tank capacity and armor thickness to tactical methods observed during the 2 preceding days of fierce fighting. This valuable information allowed Japanese artillerymen to skillfully create veritable kill zones along probable tank routes, forming overlapping fields of fire capable of raining down on the flamethrower vehicles at the most critical, vulnerable moments. But even in such a meat grinder, there were those who could cheat death, using the very ground as an ally. Lutz's tank, defying all enemy calculations, managed to withstand furious artillery bombardment by masterfully exploiting the local landscape, which served as ideal camouflage for its movements. Iwo Jima's unique volcanic terrain offered natural cover where these formidable machines could hide between assault runs. However, these same natural features paradoxically channeled movement along predictable routes that enemy artillery could pre-range for instant targeting. The tactical dilemma of protecting flamethrower tanks while preserving their offensive potential demanded extraordinary solutions that went beyond standard armored doctrine. Lutz, demonstrating ingenuity, established close cooperation with infantry smoke teams to create a visual screen during approach phases, significantly reducing the effectiveness of Japanese observation posts. But even the cleverest maneuver couldn't save them from another, equally insidious threat lurking within the machines themselves. A fuel supply crisis soon emerged as a secondary, yet no less serious problem threatening to paralyze flamethrower tank operations even without direct combat losses. Each of these specialized vehicles consumed an average of 60 gallons of napalm fuel per hour during active combat, completely depleting its 400-gallon reserve in just 7 hours of continuous engagement. The logistical echelon required to sustain such fuel volumes significantly exceeded the capabilities of existing shore support facilities, forcing combat engineers to establish forward fuel depots literally under heavy enemy fire. Moreover, the specialized nature of napalm fuel created additional handling difficulties. The thickened gasoline mixture required heating to maintain proper fluidity characteristics in cool weather conditions. However, beyond technical and logistical challenges, the war also took its toll on the psyche of those who operated these fiery monsters. Sergeant Martinez, after Peter's tragic death, assumed command of the second flamethrower tank, inheriting a crew who had witnessed their lead vehicle explode in a fireball, leaving no recognizable remains. The psychological trauma of operating a weapon capable of incinerating its own crews immediately and palpably affected combat effectiveness. Reaction times slowed, and coordination among crew members significantly deteriorated under stress. Martinez, understanding the critical nature of the situation, promptly implemented crew rotation procedures to prevent psychological breakdown, ensuring that no individual remained at peak stress levels for extended periods during intense combat operations. Meanwhile, the adaptation of Japanese defenses gained momentum as Kuribayashi's engineers developed countermeasures specifically designed to repel flamethrower attacks. Bunker modifications included innovative water spray systems capable of extinguishing napalm fires, improved ventilation, reducing flame penetration effectiveness, and structural changes that diverted liquid fuel away from critical areas. These enhancements could not be implemented in all defensive positions due to resource limitations, but they represented a systematic effort to neutralize the advantage of American flamethrower weapons through engineering solutions rather than solely tactical maneuvers. But even the most well-conceived modifications and tactics required constant support to avoid becoming scrap metal. Combat engineers from the 5th Marine Division established repair bases in the rear, Understanding that mechanical failures posed as great a threat to these specialized machines as enemy action. Flamethrower systems required constant and meticulous maintenance due to the corrosive effects of napalm fuel on metal components and the high pressure used in delivering the incendiary mixture. Technicians worked around the clock to keep the tanks combat-ready, often performing repairs under incessant artillery fire. As Japanese artillerymen deliberately targeted support facilities alongside frontline combat units. The tactical stalemate that developed by February 23rd clearly reflected both sides' adaptation to the brutal new conditions of the battlefield. Japanese forces had learned to effectively counter flamethrower attacks through improved gunnery and defensive modifications, while Marine commanders struggled to protect their vulnerable flamethrower tanks without sacrificing their crucial offensive capability. This balance between power and vulnerability led to a rethinking of these machines' role in the next decisive phase of the battle. The initial breakthrough, which seemed to promise a swift victory, quickly gave way to a grueling war of attrition that favored the defenders with their prepared positions and interior lines of communication. The 8 experimental weapons that had so dramatically altered the initial phase of the battle now represented a dwindling asset, requiring extremely careful use for critical operations. McVeigh received orders to preserve the remaining tanks for the final assault on Mount Suribachi. Recognizing that the specialized capabilities of these machines would be absolutely essential for capturing the fortress complex crowning Iwo Jima's southern peak, the decision to withdraw flamethrower tanks from routine bunker clearing operations reflected the harsh lessons learned about vulnerability and resilience in sustained combat. Weapons that had seemed to offer easy solutions to tactical problems proved to require as meticulous planning and resource management as conventional systems, but with the added complexity of extreme vulnerability to enemy countermeasures. All of this led to the culmination, the very assault for which these machines were created. The assault on Mount Suribachi commenced at precisely Onzo 6 on March 10th, with 5 surviving flamethrower tanks leading the final thrust against Kuribayashi's command complex. The volcanic peak rose 554 feet above the battlefield, riddled with a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that had taken 8 long months to construct. Intelligence estimated that approximately 3,000 Japanese defenders remained within this mountain fortress, sheltered behind 15-foot masses of solid rock and concrete barriers capable of withstanding direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. This was to be the final battle where the fate of the flamethrower tanks would be definitively decided. Prepare yourselves, because today we're diving into one of the most brutal and decisive battles of World War II, where desperate defense met unstoppable force. Many of us have heard of battles where there seemed to be no way out, where every step forward cost incredible sacrifices. But what if I told you that even the most impregnable fortifications could fall in the face of ingenuity and fire? How did the Marines manage to overcome what seemed impossible? And what exactly made the Japanese defenders, known for their resilience, retreat and even flee their positions? We've all faced situations where it seemed like an insurmountable wall was built before us, and every effort we made crashed against it. You fight and fight, but nothing changes. I myself have been in such a position many times, feeling utterly desperate. But it is in such moments that solutions are born that change everything. Today, we will tell the story of how American forces found such a quote 80 way that opened the most seemingly locked doors. This is not just a story of war. It is a story of overcoming the unconquerable. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We're very interested to know the geography of our audience. Captain McVeigh, demonstrating tactical acumen, positioned his tank units in a semicircle at the base of the mountain. His actions were meticulously coordinated with artillery observers, whose task was to identify cave entrances that required immediate incendiary treatment. Meanwhile, the tank operated by Lutz slowly but surely approached the main tunnel entrance located on the mountain's eastern slope. This position had steadfastly held off all infantry attacks for 3 days, utilizing a 75mm anti-tank gun. The cave entrance was securely protected by a massive 6-inch thick steel door equipped with firing slits. These apertures allowed the gun crew to deliver accurate fire against the enemy while remaining invulnerable to counter battery fire. Conventional explosives proved ineffective against this barrier, and any infantry attempts to approach the position resulted in heavy casualties from the deluge of fire from machine gun nests skillfully positioned on the slopes above. In this situation, the Flamethrower tank represented the only weapon system capable of neutralizing this fortified position without unacceptable losses. The approach route to the cave traversed 800 yards of open terrain, which was under interlocking fire from several defensive positions. Japanese observers, located in caves higher up the mountain, could accurately direct artillery fire onto any armored vehicle attempting to reach the anti-tank gun position. This deadly zone had already claimed 2 conventional tanks in previous assault attempts. Lutz, fully aware of the danger, meticulously coordinated his actions with smoke teams to create effective visual concealment. Simultaneously, artillery batteries opened fire with white phosphorus shells to further obscure his tank's movement across the open ground. The steel door protecting the cave entrance was manufactured at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and transported to Iwo Jima in sections during the defensive preparation phase. This barrier weighed a full 12 tons and was designed to withstand explosive charges of up to 500 pounds. Internal structural reinforcement effectively distributed impact effects across its entire surface. Japanese engineers were confident that American forces lacked the specialized equipment needed to breach such massive obstacles, rendering the cave positions virtually invulnerable to conventional assault. However, they failed to account for the possibility that liquid fire could penetrate the firing slits like burning water, and this proved to be their fatal error. Private Johnson, operating Lutz's tank, navigated the cratered landscape with surgical precision. He masterfully used shell craters and debris piles for concealment while maintaining the speed necessary to minimize exposure to enemy fire. The tank's 37-ton weight kicked up plumes of volcanic dust, which, on one hand, helped mask its movement, but on the other, revealed its position to observers equipped with binoculars. Artillery shells began to fall around the vehicle as Japanese gunners attempted to bracket their target, sending geysers of black sand and steel fragments along the approach route. At 100 yards from the cave entrance, Lutz ordered his gunner to prepare for flamethrower discharge while the tank maneuvered into an optimal firing position. The steel door completely filled his periscope's field of view, its surface pitted with bullet and shell fragment marks from previous assault attempts. The firing slits were barely visible as dark rectangles in the massive barrier, but reconnaissance photographs had provided precise measurements that allowed for accurate targeting. A stream of napalm was intended to penetrate the firing slits and enter the chamber behind them, where it could ignite stored ammunition and destroy the gun crew with heat and toxic gases. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We're very interested to know the geography of our audience. The flamethrower burst lasted only 12 seconds, but in that time, it discharged 200 gallons of napalm over the remaining distance to the cave entrance. The burning fuel struck the steel door with terrifying force and surged through the firing slits like liquid lightning, instantly filling the chamber with flames reaching temperatures over 2000 degrees. The anti-tank gun crew perished within seconds, suffocated by superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could reach the rear exit of the chamber. The 75mm gun, which had dominated the eastern approach route, was silenced forever, its barrel glowing red-hot from the fire that engulfed its position. The destruction of this key anti-tank gun position created a critical breach in Kuribayashi's defensive perimeter, which infantry companies immediately exploited to reach the base of the mountain. Captain Shoop, capitalizing on this breakthrough, led his Marines through the newly formed passage. They used the fire-scorched rocks as cover, advancing toward secondary cave entrances where machine gun nests and mortar positions were located. The psychological impact of seeing their strongest defensive position engulfed in flames demoralized the Japanese soldiers in supporting positions. Many, seized by panic, abandoned their posts to avoid similar annihilation, opening the way for the next phase of the offensive. Captain McVeigh directed the remaining 4 tanks toward the cave systems located on the northern and western slopes of the mountain. Here, Japanese defenders had created overlapping fields of fire that effectively controlled all approaches to the summit. These positions were smaller than the main tunnel complex, but equally well protected, with concrete barriers and steel doors blocking direct access to internal chambers. The flamethrower tanks had to operate independently, as the complex terrain hindered mutual support between vehicles and limited artillery support due to steep firing angles. This demanded maximum autonomy and skill from each crew. Sergeant Martinez commanded the second flamethrower tank in the attack, targeting a machine gun nest carved directly into the mountainside at an elevation of 90 meters above sea level. This position provided a clear view of the entire western beach and had delivered continuous fire on landing operations for 2 weeks, inflicting significant damage. All previous infantry assaults on the cave had failed due to the steep approach route and supporting fire from adjacent positions. The flamethrower tank once again offered the only way to eliminate this threat without unacceptable casualties among the assault companies. The cave housing the machine gun nest was excavated by Japanese engineers using advanced mining technologies mastered in Manchuria, with chambers extending 18 meters into solid rock. The entrance was protected by a formidable concrete barrier with a firing slit barely 45 centimeters wide, through which the machine gun could engage targets while remaining completely protected from return fire. The chamber walls were lined with steel plates to prevent collapse, creating an enclosed space that would retain flames and toxic gases for an extended period, making it virtually impregnable to conventional assault methods. Have you ever faced a problem that seemed absolutely insurmountable? A challenge that stands before you like an impenetrable wall, and every effort you make seems futile? Today, we will transport ourselves to Iwo Jima, an island where Japanese defenses were exactly such a wall, a labyrinth of bunkers and caves that seemed impossible to breach. But what if I told you that a seemingly experimental weapon was able to fundamentally change the situation, turning hopeless resistance into swift defeat? How could these impregnable fortresses, once deemed invulnerable, be crushed? And how can this lesson in unwavering resolve and innovation be applied to your own seemingly insurmountable challenges? The answers to these questions will be revealed now, and you will discover that even the strongest barriers have their weaknesses. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. On that fateful day, Martinez, commanding his flamethrower tank, took a strategic position on a specially excavated ledge on a steep mountainside. Thanks to an innovative hydraulic stabilization system, the vehicle could maintain pinpoint accuracy even when firing upwards at a 45-degree angle. The modified flamethrower's elevation mechanism was adapted for extreme conditions. But the aerodynamics of the incendiary mixture at such steep angles created insurmountable targeting challenges that even exhaustive training couldn't fully overcome. The napalm stream had to arc skyward, much like an artillery shell's trajectory, before striking the narrow cave opening with sufficient destructive force to penetrate inside and fulfill its deadly mission. And so, a flaming volley arced skyward through the serene morning air, following a precisely calculated ballistic trajectory that ended at the cave entrance with deadly accuracy. The hot napalm surged through the narrow opening, instantly engulfing the chamber's interior in incinerating flames that clung to every surface. This infernal blaze began consuming the oxygen vital for life. The machine gun crew perished instantly, along with 20 rounds that detonated in a chain reaction of ignitions, transforming the cave's interior into a searing furnace. The position controlling the western approaches to Mount Suribachi was eliminated in just 15 seconds of fire. By noon on March 10th, 5 flamethrower tanks had methodically reduced to rubble 47 deeply entrenched cave fortifications, reinforced concrete bunkers, and key defensive strongpoints that formed the backbone of Japanese resistance on Mount Suribachi. The systematic eradication of these positions breached the seemingly impregnable perimeter, which infantry companies could now exploit to storm the mountain's summit. Moreover, the psychological impact surpassed the direct tactical damage, as Japanese defenders watched in horror as their most unassailable positions were engulfed by flames, a weapon against which they had absolutely no effective defense. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The decisive strike against Kuribayashi's main command post required the coordinated action of all 5 remaining flamethrower tanks, converging on a reinforced underground chamber located 15 meters deep beneath the mountain's summit. This facility was designed as an utterly impregnable stronghold with 3-meter thick reinforced concrete walls and an intricate network of escape routes interwoven with a labyrinth of tunnel systems throughout the mountain. Intelligence indicated that General Kuribayashi himself was in this chamber, commanding the last pockets of resistance on Iwo Jima from a sanctuary he mistakenly believed to be invulnerable. The incinerating assault that brought an end to Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima lasted nearly 37 minutes, as 5 tanks methodically reduced to dust every defensive position on both the steep slopes and the very summit of Mount Suribachi. When the firestorm finally subsided, the mountain stronghold, once considered impregnable, was now a pile of molten ruins, its tunnel labyrinths choked with acrid smoke, and its defenders silenced forever. A weapon, perceived as experimental just 3 weeks prior, had proved its ability to crush the most formidable defensive structures the Japanese Empire could create.